What Came Ashore at Lirios by Dr. Alice B. Sheldon, a.k.a. James Tiptree, Jr. The tourist throws spent Polaroid, where Spaniards threw spent slaves, and now and then a tourist joins 5 centuries of graves. For love, it's wiser to avoid smiles from those brilliant waves. The old coca ranch foreman saw him first. It was a day of roaring hot south wind. The beach smoked under the thrashing coca palms, and the Caribbean raved by like a billion white devils heading for Cuba, 400 miles north. When I went down to see what Don Paocamul was peering at, I could barely hold one eye open against the glaring, flying sand. The beach stretched empty to the hazed horizon, dazzling white coral, marked only by faint hieroglyphs of tar and wrack. "Que?" I howled above the wind shriek. "Caminante!" Interested, I peered harder. I'd heard of the caminantes, the walking men of old days who passed their lives drifting up and down this long, wild shore. One of the dark streaks was, perhaps, moving. "Vaya caminante?" The old man, he was a decade younger than I, spat down hard at a ghost crab blowing by. "Gringo!" He took a hard, sideways squint up at me, as he always did when he used that word. Then he screwed his face into one of his wider Maya grimaces, which might mean anything or nothing, and stumped back up the bluff to his lunch, slapping his big old-fashioned machete as he went. My eyes were caked with salt and sand. I, too, retired up to my wind-eroded patio to wait. What finally came plodding into view along the tide line was a black skeleton, a stick figure with fuzz blowing around the head. When he halted by the compass palm and turned to look up at the rancho, I half expected the sea glare to shine through his ribs. The rancho was a straggling line of 5 small pole and thatch huts, 3 smoky copra drying racks, and a well with a winch bucket. At the end was a 2-room owner's casita, on whose rented patio I sat. The apparition stared straight up toward me. Nearer, I saw he was indeed a gringo. The hair and beard whipping his sun-blackened face was a crusted pinkish gray. His emaciated body was charred black with a few white scar lines on his legs, and he was naked, save for a pair of frayed shorts and his heavy leather sandals. A meager roll of serape and a canteen were slung on his shoulders. He could have been 60 or 30. "Can I have some water, please?" The English came out a bit rusty, but it was the voice that startled me. A clear young voice right out of Midwest suburbia. "Of course." The sun glittered on a shark knife hanging from the stranger's belt, showing its well-honed edge. I gestured toward a shady spot on the patio curb and saw him slumped down where I could keep an eye on him before I went in. Incongruous young voices like his aren't unknown even here. They come from the scraps of human flotsam that drifts down the tropic latitudes, hoping that tomorrow, or next year, they will get their heads in order. Some are heartbreaking. A few are dangerous, while they last. I knew that slanted eyes were watching from the rancho, but no one could see into the casa, and only a fool would rely on a Maya to protect one old gringo from another. But when I came out, he was sitting where I left him, gazing out at the blazing mill race of the sea. Thank you. Very much. He took one slow, shaky sip, and then 2 more, and sat up straighter. Then he uncapped his canteen, rinsed, and filled it carefully from my pitcher before drinking more. The rinse water he poured on my struggling casuarina seedling. I saw that the canteen under its cooler rag was a sturdy, anodized sea light. The knife, too, was a first-rate old puma. His worn sandals were in repair, too, and wearing them was a mark both of status and sense. When he lifted the glass again, the eyes that glanced at me out of his sun-ravaged face shone a clear, steady light hazel. I picked up my own mug of cold tea and leaned back. "Wood cotton," the young stranger said, giving it the Maya click. "The stuffer." He jerked his wild beard at the brilliant gale around us and explained between slow sips. "They call it that because it blows until it stuffs the North Pole, see? And then it all comes blasting back in a nor'easter." A scrap of my typing paper from the local dump came flittering by. He slapped a sandal on it, smoothed it, and folded it into his pack. As he moved, a nearby palm root suddenly reared up and became a big iguana. The creature stared at us over its wattles with the pompous wariness that had carried it from the Jurassic, gave two ludicrous, intention bobs, and streaked off at a flying waddle, tail high. We both grinned. "More water?" Please. You have good water here." He stated it as a known fact, which it was. "Where did you fill your canteen?" "Pájaros. Punta Pájaros." I refilled the pitcher, more than a little appalled. All groundwater sits at the lagoon mouth, a kilometer south. Even considering that he was walking north with the wind, had this man, or boy, really come the 30 miles of burning, bone-dry sandbar between here and the Pájaros lighthouse on that canteen? Moreover, Pájaros itself has no water. The fishermen who camp there occasionally bring in an oil drum full, but were otherwise believed to subsist on beer, tequila, and other liquids not usually considered potable. No wonder he had rinsed the canteen, I thought, hunting out my pack of sodium K-tabs. Even without the stuffer blowing, people can desiccate to congestive heart failure without feeling it on this windy shore. But he refused them, rather absently, still staring at the sea. "All the electrolyte you need, right there. If you're careful. Our blood is really modified seawater. Isn't that right?" He roused, and turned round to look at me directly, almost appraisingly. I saw his gaze take in the corner of the room behind us where my driftwood bookshelves were dimly visible through the sliding glass doors that had long ceased to slide. He nodded. "I heard you have a lot of books. Muy pesados. Heavy books. Libros psicológicos. Right?" This chance visitation was changing character unwelcomely. It wasn't odd that he should have known much about me. Gossip has flowed ceaselessly up and down this coast for 3,000 years. Now I had the impression that something about those heavy psychological books had drawn him here, and it made me uneasy. Like many experimental psychologists, I have had harrowing difficulties trying to explain to some distressed stranger that an extensive knowledge of the cognitive behavior of rats has no clinical applications. But his own radar was in excellent shape. He was already wrapping his canteen and slinging on his roll. "Look, I don't mean to interrupt you. The breeze is easing off. It'll be nice later on. If you don't mind, I'll just go down by that big drift log there and rest a while before I move on. Thanks for the water. The breeze was doing a roaring 30 knots, and the huge mahogany timber down on the beach could hardly be seen for flying sand. If this was a ploy, it was ridiculous. No, you're not interrupting anything. If you want to wait, stay here in the shade. I've snoozed by that log before. He grinned down at me from his skeletal height. His tone wasn't brash, just gentle and resolute, and his teeth were very white and clean. At least let me pass you a couple of spare grapefruit. I've more than I can eat. Oh, great! Looking back, it's hard to say when and why it began to seem important that he stop and not go on. Certainly my sense of him had changed radically about that time. I now saw him as competent to this country and to his strange life, whatever it might be. Doubtless more competent than I. Not flotsam, and not in need of any ordinary help. But as time went on, something, maybe a projection of my own, maybe the unrelenting wind scream that day, perhaps merely the oddness of the sea light reflected in his pale eyes, made me sense him as being, well, marked. Not at all doomed, which isn't uncommon in this land, particularly if one neglects to contribute to the proper officials, and not scarred, as by some trauma, or watched by an enemy. I had merely an unquieting sense that my visitor was, at this time, in some special relation to a force obscure and powerful, that he was significantly vulnerable to I knew not what, only that it waited ahead of him along the lonely sand. But his talk at first couldn't have been less ominous. Stowing the weazened grapefruit, he told me that he came down every year to walk this coast. Sometimes I get as far as Belize before I have to head back. You weren't here when I passed going south. So you're on your way home now. Did you make Belize? No, the business went on too late. He jerked his beard in the general direction of Yankeedom. May I ask what business is? He grinned, a whimsical black skeleton. I design swimming pools in Des Moines. My partner does most of the installation, but he needs my designs for the custom jobs. We started in college 5 years back. It really took off. It got so heavy I had to get away. So I found this place. I poured myself some more stale tea to let that sink in. Would my scrap paper end as a sketch for some good citizen's Iowa patio? Do you ever run into any of the old caminantes? Only a few left. Old men now. Hidden Star Smith, Estrella Escondida Kamal, Kamal. It's like Smith here. You know, he stays pretty close to pájaros these days, and don't point at rainbows. Beg your pardon. Another old caminante. I don't know his name. We were watching the storm past at sunset, see? Maybe you've noticed they can throw this fantastic double, triple, arcoiris. Rainbows. First one I'd seen. I pointed at it, and he got excited and clouded my arm down. No ponte! Don't point, see? He rubbed his elbow reminiscently. He doesn't speak much Spanish, but he got it to me that something bad would jump out of the rainbow and run right down my arm into my ear. So whenever I meet him, I tell him, no punto. And we have a laugh. My visitor seemed to be enjoying talking to someone who knew a little of this shore, as his Des Moines clients wouldn't. But his gaze still roved the gale-torn sea, and he had not unslung his blanket roll. How do you get across those two monster bays between here and Belize? Surely you can't hike around. Or have they finally cut back there too? Not yet. No way. What isn't underwater is tribal treaty land. I saw an air photo with 3 unnamed villages on it. I know where a couple of suck bays came out, though. You know, the old Maya roads. There's nothing but limestone ridges now. There was this man on one of them one night. He wasn't wearing pants. He disappeared like, psh. I went to walk back in a ways to the strip, but his gaze turned away again. He frowned at the wind. I hated to get so far inland. So how do you cross? Oh, I worked my way on a fishing boat. Fixing stuff. It's unreal what this climate does to engines. They keep them going on string and beer. I had a couple of guys who watch for me every year. If I could only leave a set of tools, but we both knew the answer to that one. Sometimes they take me all the way, or they drop me at Punta Rosa and I walk down and catch another ride over to Espiritu Santo. I asked him about the rather mysterious stretch of coast between the two huge bays. The beach is mostly rocks. You have to watch the tide, but there's an old jeep track up the bluff. 6 cocoa plantings. And the Pickle Palace. You know about that. You mean it really exists? Oh, yeah! This incredible Rico Politico from Mexico. The pickles were just a sideline. I guess he wanted a private paradise. Turrets, stained glass windows, at least a dozen guest houses. Everything tiled. An airstrip. And every damn bit brought in by lighter. Through the reef. They say he went down a couple of times, but his mistress didn't like it. Of course, it's all overgrown now. There's an old caretaker who chops it out and grows corn by the fountain. The thing is, the whole place is in exquisite taste. I mean, really lovely. 1930s Art Deco. Top grade. The incongruous words from this wild, naked stranger, like the Pickle Palace itself, were eroding my sense of reality. This is not unusual in the Quintana Roo. And nobody seems to have looted the inside. I went into the kitchens. He had what has to be the first microwave oven in the world. Didn't stay long. There was a live tiger asleep in the living room. You mean a jaguar? No, a real tiger from India with stripes and huge. He must have had a zoo, see. There's birds that don't belong here too. This tiger was on a white velvet couch, fast asleep on his back with his paws crossed on his chest. Most beautiful thing I've ever saw. He blinked and then added quietly, almost. What happened? He woke up and took right off over my head out the door. My guest grinned up, as if still seeing the great beast sail over. Of course, I was down crawling like a madman out the other way. I never told anybody, but when I came by, a couple of years later, there was his skull speared up on the wall. Pity. That's a lovely story. It's true. His tone made me quickly say, I know it is. That's why it's good. Made-up yarns don't count. Look, this wind isn't going to quit soon. Maybe you'd like to come in, wash up or whatever while I scare us up a snack. Tea suit you? Or would a Coke? Or some cerveza go better? That's really good of you. Tea's fine. As he followed me in, he caught sight of his reflection in the sandy glass and gave a whistle. Then I heard a clank. He had quickly unstrapped the knife and laid it down inside the sill. "You really are buenos gentes, you know?" I pointed out the old gravity-feed shower. "Don't get too clean. It'll draw the chiquiquistas." He laughed, the first carefree young sound I'd heard from him. And he started turning out his pockets, clearly intending to walk straight under, shorts and all. I put the kettle on my gas one burner and started loading a tray with cheeses and ham. He came out just as I was pouring, and I nearly dropped the kettle on us both. His skin was still burnt black, showing several more scars where he had apparently tangled with a coral reef. The wet shorts were still basically khaki, but now visibly enlivened by sturdy Mexican floral print patches and edged top and bottom by pink lines of less burnt skin. The effect was literally and figuratively topped off by his damp, slicked-down hair and beard. Relieved of their crust, they shone and flamed bright strawberry red, such as I've seldom seen in nature or anywhere else. He seemed totally unconscious of the change in his appearance and was looking around carefully the kitchen corner and my wall of books. "You like stories?" he inquired. "Yes. For a taste of that real maple syrup there, I'll swap you a good one. I mean, true. I want to ask you a question about it." I was too occupied reassembling the tray and my perceptions to indulge in any more suspicions, and answered simply, "With pleasure." He watched appreciatively as I poured a generous dollop into a baggie and secured it in a sea-scoured detergente jar. "You scrounge at the beach, too?" "My supermercado," I told him. "That's right." His gravity was returning. "Everything you need. It sends." When we got ourselves settled in, I saw that the stuffer was really subsiding slightly. The cocoa palms swept the sand in a wind which had lost a decibel or two, and the sea beyond was regaining some of its wondrous Carib turquoise, shot with piercing lime green in the coral shallows. The white lemmings of the bay raced northward still, but the far reef was now visible as a great seething, tumbling snowbank, lit with the diamonds of the afternoon sun. It might be a nice night. "It began right out there by your north point, as a matter of fact." My guest pointed left with his piece of cheese and took a small bite. "This particular evening was fantastic. Dead calm. Full moon. You could see colors. It was like looking at a sunny day through dark cloth. If you know what I mean." I nodded. It was a perfect description. "I was going along, watching the sea like I always do. You know, there's an old pass through the reef out there. You can't see it now." He peered out to our left, absently laying down the cheese. "Well, yes, you can if you know. Anyway, that's where I noticed this pole sticking up. I mean, first I saw it, and then I didn't, and then it bobbed up again, shining in the moonlight. I figured some idiot had tried to stick a channel marker there, and then I saw it was loose and wobbling along in the current. I guess you know there's about a 3-knot current to the north all along here." "I do. But look, eat first, story later. That cheese will die of old age." I passed him some ham on a tortilla. He thanked me, took one big bite, and laid it on his knee, his eyes still frowning at the reef as though to recapture every detail. I slowed down to keep pace with it. Every big swell would wash it in closer. It kept on almost disappearing, and then it'd come up again, bigger than before. For a while, I thought it might be some huge fluorescent tube. You know how they come in, waving. But when it got inside the reef, I saw no bulb could possibly be that big, and it had some sort of something on it. By this time, it was free of the reef and going along north at a pretty good clip. Just this big pole in the sea, swaying vertically along, getting shorter and taller, maybe 2 meters at times. I stayed with it, puzzled as hell. By this time, I figured it might be the spar of some buoy, maybe dragging a chain that kept it upright. He broke off and said in a different tone, "That lad in the blue hat, he your boy?" I peered. A familiar, battered, bright blue captain's hat was disappearing over the dune beside the rancho. "Oh, that's Eck, our local Nino." I tapped my temple in the universal gesture that means here, child of God. "He's somebody's wife's sister's son by somebody's cousin. Sort of a self-appointed guard. He chased me off your well with a machete when I came by last year." "I think he's harmless, really. But strong." "Yeah. Well, anyway, this thing, whatever it was, had me sort of fascinated. When it got hung up, I'd sit down and wait until it went on again. I wanted it, see? If it was an instrumented buoy, maybe there'd be valuable stuff on it. I'd heard of people getting return rewards. No. That's just what I told myself. The truth is, I just wanted it. I had a feeling. Maybe this sounds crazy. Like it was meant for me. I don't tell this well. You know, something coming in from the sea all by itself, and you're all alone. I know exactly what you mean. This tea tray came in like that. I spent half a morning getting it in a nor'easter." He nodded his amazing colored head and gently touched the fine wood of the tray as if I had passed some test. "Yeah. Anything you need." Well, by this time, what tide there was going out, and I saw that the thing wasn't coming any closer for a while. But we were about halfway to that point where there's a backflow. What they call a point around here is about as flat as your hand, but this one really does shift the current. About 10 miles on, some crazy Yank tried to build a resort there. Lirios. Yes, the lilies. I came here the year the government chased him out. Misuse of agricultural land, they called it. He seems to have left owing everybody. I imagine they cleaned him out pretty well first. He had great plans. Is anything left? Just some foundations with nice tiling and part of a construction trailer. A fellow called Pedro Angel from Tres Cenotes has his family there. He runs a 1-bottle cantina, among other things. The pozo is still fairly good. I was going to get my water there if you weren't here." I shook my head, thinking of those extra miles. "Eck shouldn't have done that to you. I'll talk to Don Pao." He glanced at me, Maya-wise. "Don't bother. I mean, it won't help. Thanks anyway. Look, are you sure you want to hear all this?" "Very sure. But I wish you'd put that ham out of its misery. You picked it up 6 times. Is there anything you'd rather eat?" "Oh, no. This is great." Obediently, he took 2 small bites and drank some tea, looking for the moment like a much younger man. A boy. His eyes were still on the calming reef, where even I could now see the zigzag of darker water. That was the old pass. The tide was running out. A solitary cloud cast a rosy reflection on the glittering horizon, and the palms were quieting. It would be a beautiful night indeed, with, I now recalled, a fine full moon. I had long since planned to bed my visitor down on a hammock in my study. Maya hospitality is no problem. Every corner has its hammock hooks, and most commercial travelers even carry their own nets. Anyway, there I was with this thing making long, slow bounces, getting taller and shorter, and me following right along. This beach in the moonlight. His voice softened. The face in its flaming frame was still a boy's, but shadowed now by deeper feeling. The moon had just started down inshore, so that it really lit up the pole. And just about the time we got to Lirios, I saw the markings where something wrapped around it. When it came up high, I could see sort of white bulges, and then some dark stuff started to drift loose and blow. At first I thought it was seaweed, and then I decided it was an old flag, and I hadn't seen it before because the chain or whatever was waiting it held down in deep water. But now it was dragging on the shallows, riding much higher out, and then it stuck on the Lirios sandbar. And I saw it was a long, thin bundle, wrapped or tied on the pole. It stuck there until a swell turned it around and carried it right toward me. And I saw the face. His own face had turned seaward now, so I had to lean toward him to catch the blowing words. It was a person, see, or a body, tied to that spar with long black hair floating in a sort of white dress flapping out between the ropes, starting to dry whenever it stayed out of the sea. The person had to be dead, of course, but I didn't stop to think much after I saw the face. He swallowed. Anyway, there's a rotten backflow there. Even if they say there's no such thing as an undertow, it feels like one. A sea puss. I was wading and stumbling out, see. It's steep and rough gravel. Not like here. But I swim a lot. I repressed a protest. The Yank who built Lirios lost 4 customers before he would believe the locals. The surf there is no place to swim, even on calm days. The first wave that lifted me up, I saw the thing wasn't a buoy at all. There was more stuff surfacing beside the spar. Next time I got a look, I saw gunwales, and the top of a cabin astern. A fancy longboat, see, maybe 8 or 10 meters, and polished. I could see the moon on wood and brass. The person was tied on the broken-off mast. He took another mouthful of cold tea, his eyes on an inner vision. He seemed to be making an effort to recount this very carefully and undramatically. Polished. He nodded to himself, yes. Wet wood might look shiny, but not those Orlock things. Hell, I felt it, too. It got there, see. Not even thinking. I mean, I never touched any dead people. Not really dead. Just my grandfather's funeral, and his casket had glass. This was a lot different. I thought about what really dead fish were like, and I almost turned back. And then the next wave showed me the face close, and the eyes. Her eyes were open. By then I was sure it was a woman. Her eyes seemed to be looking right at me in the bright moonlight, shining. Not dead. So huge, and her arm moved or floated like it was pulling at the ropes. So I kept on. His hand instinctively moved to touch the knife it laid beside him. My leg hit something on the side of the boat beside her. That's where I got this one. He indicated a long gray scar. And I started cutting ropes, all in among the silky stuff. The boat rolled us underwater. I remember thinking, oh God, I'm cutting into dead meat. Maybe she'll come all apart. And the boat rolled worse. It was hung up on its keel, trying to go turtle. He drew a long breath. But then her arm hit me and it felt firm. So I got a good grip on it and took another lungful of air and cut the foot ropes way down under and kicked us both out of there just before the whole thing rolled. He sucked in another lungful, remembering. After that, it was just a battle. All that damn silk, and I can still see the moon going round and round through it. I couldn't get any decent air at all until a lucky wave rolled us up on that sliding gravel stuff. It isn't like here. I knew I had to get us farther out before the backwash. I caught one good look at this face with the dark hair streaming all over it. Her eyes were closed then. I sort of passed out for a moment. But I couldn't quite because I knew I had to do something about the water in her. But all I could was grab her waist. It was tiny. I could almost touch both hands around and kind of jolt her face down as I crawled up the shingle on my knees. A gush of water came out, and then we both fell into the trash line, and there was my canteen. So I managed to pull some fresh water, more or less at her mouth, through the hair, and I thought her eyes were opening again, just as I passed out for good. Funny, he added in a different tone, and frowned. What? I was frowning too, wondering how strong those skeleton tendons could be. A formidable feat, if true. But he was not, after all, much thinner than Cousteau, and a lot younger. And the Quintana Roo is peopled with survivors of harrowing ordeals. The trash line was different, he said slowly. No basura, no kipple at all. Just a little natural tar and weed and sea fans, you know. I can see it. He screwed up his eyes, remembering hard for a moment. Anyway, he went on, I was out cold. I don't know how long. The next thing I remember is hearing that voice. His lips twitched in a dreamy grin. It was a perfectly beautiful voice, soft and rough, low. Contralto, do you call it? Going on and on. I just lay still a while, listening. She was standing up somewhere behind my head. This incredible emotion, and complicated too, controlled. I couldn't make out the language, although I thought I heard Dios a few times, and then I caught the lisp. Teteo, what they call Castilian. I'd heard it once on a tape, but never like this. At first I thought she was thanking God for saving her. His grin flickered again. She was cursing, swearing. Not like a puta. No simple stuff, but this long cadence, complex, hissing fury. So intense, I tell you, it was so savage it could scorch you if you didn't know a word. Among everything else, she was letting God know what she thought of him, too. You know they say down here the Spanish is 500 words and 400 are curses. She used up the ones I knew in a minute or so and went on from there. I began to understand better a lot about oro, pozo dorado, fountain of gold, and about her crew. She was pacing then. Every so often I could hear her stamp. I pieced together that they'd found something. Gold, or treasure maybe, and her crew had deserted and left her tied on the boat. Or maybe they'd hit a rock in a storm. It was all pretty confusing. There was a lot about fighting. Very violent. Maybe she'd tied herself on when she was alone in the storm. It sounded unreal. But real, too. I mean, I'd cut those ropes. And now she was asking, no, she was telling God exactly how to punish everybody. I think she was partly talking to the devil, too. all in the most graphic detail you couldn't imagine. Talk about bloody-minded. His lips still smiled, but his eyes were wide and sober, staring north up at the beach. I lay listening to her and picturing her in my mind like a woman out of Goya. You know? Someone I never believed existed. Then I got my eyes open. It was bright, blazing moonlight. Everything glittered, and I rolled over to see... Oh, God. I was looking up straight into this beautiful, furious face, big black eyes actually flashing, scornful, utterly sensuous, curled lips and nostrils. Talk about aristocratic. She'd pulled her hair back and tied it. But then I saw the rest of her. It was all wrong. My woman was gone. The person was a man. He shook his head slowly from side to side, eyes closed as if to shut out some intolerable sight, and went on in a flat, controlled tone. Yeah, he was younger than me. No beard. What I thought was a dress was this great white silk shirt. He was stuffing it back in his pants while he cursed and paced. Shiny, tight black breeches with this horrible, great, fly, codpiece, whatever, right in my face. He had loose, soft black boots with heels and tiny feet. Ah, Christ. If I had the strength, I'd have dragged him right back into the Caribbean and left him on that boat. I wanted my woman back so bad. Then he noticed I was awake. His only response was to wind up one terrifying curse and say, "Vino!" at me. Not, "Hello?" What? Just "Vino!" without hardly looking at me, like I was some kind of wine machine, and paced off again. When he turned back and saw I hadn't moved, he glanced at me sharper and repeated, "Vino!" quite loud. I still wasn't moving. So he came back a step nearer and said, "Entonces, agua!" I just stared up at him. So he snapped his fingers like he was talking to a dog or an idiot and said very clearly, "Agua! Agua para tomar!" You never saw arrogance like that. To get his point over, he flipped the empty canteen over in the sand toward me with the toe of his boot. That really pissed me off, getting sand on the screw threads. I'd figured him for some zillionaire general's spoiled brat, playing games. I started getting up, not really sure whether I was going to murder him or just walk away, but I found I was so weak that standing up was about it for me then. So I remembered this thing a lady had put me down with and wrestled it into my best Spanish. The word you're groping for, man, is thank you. It must have sounded like some weird dialect to him, but he got the point of that hombre. Oh, wow. Did you ever see anyone's nostrils flare with rage and the mad eyes? You wouldn't believe. His right hand whipped around and hit a scabbard I hadn't noticed. Lucky for me, it was empty. I could see the gold jewel work on it glitter in the moonlight. That gave him a minute to look me over hard. I guess I puzzled him a little when he came to look. I was a lot huskier then, too, and my gear was in better shape. Anyway, he stayed real still in a sort of cat crouch and said abruptly, "English." "No," I told him. "Estados Unidos del Norte Americana." He just shrugged, but the edge was off his rage. He repeated more calmly, extra clear, "I desire more water to drink." I was still mad enough to say, "More water please. Man, that nearly sent him off again, but he was still studying me. I was bigger than him, see, and he didn't know I was about to fall down if he pushed. I saw his eyes flicking from my hair to my knife to this big flashy diver's watch I wore. By luck, the thing did one of its beeps just then, and his fantastic eyebrows curled up and met in the moonlight. Next second, he gave a chuckle that'd curl your hair, and suddenly bent and swept an elaborate bow, rattling off the most flowery, sarcastic speech you ever heard. I could only get parts like, "Your most gracious excellency, lord of the exalted land of hell-haired lunatics," and so on, ending with a rococo request for water. The word, please, was of course nowhere in it. No way. Would you believe I started to like the little sumbitch? My visitor turned to look me straight at for a minute. The blaze of the calming sea behind him made a curly fire of that beard and hair, and there was a different look in his hazel eyes. I recognized it. It's the look you see in the eyes of men from Crooked Tree, Montana, or Tulsa, or Duluth, when you meet them sailing the Tasman Sea, or scrambling up some nameless mountain at the world's end. The dream. Faintly self-mocking, deadly serious dream of the world. Farther, it says. Somewhere, farther on, is a place beyond all you know. And I shall find it. It had carried this boy from Iowa to the wild shore of Yucatan, and it would carry him farther if he could find the way. Maybe it was just as macho, my visitor was saying. I mean, the little bastard had to be half dead, and his crazy get-up and the pozo dorado business. For some reason, I figured he might be from Peru. There's some pretty exotic, super rich types down there. But it was a lot more than that. More like he'd found a key to some life way out. Free. Something neat. I mean, really far off. Far away. Lejos. His own voice had become far off too, and his eyes had gone back to the sea. Then he blinked a couple of times and went on in his normal tone. He misunderstood my standing there, I guess. "I will pay you," he told me. "Pagaré. Gift. Te regalaré. Mira." And before I could find words, he had reached down and slapped one boot heel, and his hand came up with this wicked little 3-inch stiletto on his thumb. His other hand was yanking up his shirt. The next thing, he was sticking this blade right in by his lowest rib. "Hey, man, no!" I sort of lurched to get his arm, but then I saw he was just slicing skin. 2 big gouts came welling out. They fell on the sand with only a little blood, and they rolled. One of them flashed deep green in the moonlight, deep green, like the sea. He picked them up with that thumbsticker pointed straight at me, and looked them over critically. The green one he dropped into his boot somewhere, and the other one he held out to me. It was dark, about as big as a small marble, lying on this slender, pointy-fingered hand. A token of my estimation for your timely assistance. When I didn't move, the palm began to gracefully tilt, to spill the stone on the ground. So I took it. Anybody would, not meaning to keep it, just out of curiosity. To see it close. It wasn't gym cut, only polished off cabochon, but when I held it up, the moonlight showed through, dark blood red like there was a fire inside. It had to be a ruby. If it wasn't too badly flawed, it must have been worth God knows what. I figured it was good, too. Obviously, he had chosen his best stuff to sew into his hide. My Spanish was drying up. I was trying to make up a suitably polite refusal and get the thing back into his hand when I saw his eyelids sliding down and his whole body sagged. He got himself straightened up again, but I could see him swaying, fighting to stay on his feet. Jesus, I got scared he was going to die in front of my face after what he'd been through. Rest. I will bring the water. I had the sense not to touch him even then. I just picked up the canteen, nearly falling over myself, and then smoothed off a clean spot for him to settle onto. He sank down gracefully, resting his chin and arms on one knee, the knife still in his hand. The moon was starting down behind us into the inland jungle, and its pitch-black shadow was spreading from the bluff to the beach where we were. I couldn't spot the trail up to Lirios. It's all low there, though, and I knew it had to be close, so I just started straight up in the nearest gully. I needed both hands to haul myself up, so I stuck the ruby in my pocket. My visitor's hand went into his shorts, the left back one, with the button. He nodded his head again. I had the impression he was trying to recall every detail. I remember I had a hell of a time securing it, but I knew I shouldn't lose that. And then I went on top of the rise. Wait. He clenched his eyes, saying almost to himself, "Cocoa palms. Did I see cocos there? I don't know, but there aren't very many. It's never been farmed. Just wild ones." When I hit the top, I found I'd made it wrong. There wasn't any clearing. Just a trail. But Lirios' damn radio goes 24 hours a day. I knew I'd hear it soon. The night was dead calm now. See, every so often I could hear a wave flop on the beach below, so I staggered along north, stopping every few steps to listen. I was feeling pretty low. If Pedro's radio was off, there was no use looking for a light. He shuts up tight. All I heard was a couple of owl hoots and the moon getting lower all the time and dry. I tried to chew a palm leaf, but it only made me worse. I just about decided that I should have gone south. This was only my second trip in there, see, when I saw a clearing right ahead, and there was this funny slurping sound. The moon was shining on a kind of ruina by one side. I wonder if maybe this was a secret pozo. People don't tell you everything, you know. When I got about 10 steps into the moonlight, a peccary exploded out and tore off like a pint-sized buffalo. That scared the pants off me, but I knew that slurping had to mean water. So I went over to the stone blocks and stepped in a wet place. This struck me odd at the time, because it was a dry year. The lagoons were even low. But I didn't stop to worry about it. I just crawled through till I found the hole and stuck my head in and guzzled. Then I filled the canteen in a plastic bag I had and got everything on me soppy wet. For that poor lad below. I remember thinking this would be a nice spot to camp out for a couple of days till we got our strength back, so I stood up to orient myself. The moon was still on the laguna, right down below me, and I sighted on an islet with the big straggler fig. The lagoon was high there, but that didn't bother me. You know how this weather varies. One place can get soaked while the rest of the coast dries up. Then I cut straight up over the dune and more or less fell down onto the beach and went back south on the last edge of moonlight to where I'd left him. I found him easy. He had the sense to crawl to a patch of light before he collapsed. Now he was lying face up, asleep or unconscious. I was scared for a minute, but his face was thrown back and I could actually see the pulse going by his long, full throat. The jawline was delicate. like a child's, or a girl's. And those gray, soft black lashes on his cheeks made him look more than ever like a beautiful woman. I knelt down by him, wondering if it could possibly be. I'd only seen the bottom of his ribs, you know. And those stuffed pants could be a fake. People do crazy things. And I'd felt that tiny waist. I was just getting my nerve to pull the shirt up when the lashes lifted and the huge dark eyes met mine. Agua pura. I held the canteen by his mouth. Drink. Tome. The hands made a feeble movement, but they were too weak to hold the canteen. I could see the fight was gone too. The eyes looked like a bewildered child's. Pardon, I said just in case, and slid one hand carefully through that glossy mass of hair to join canteen and mouth. Slowly. Drink slowly, despacho. Obediently, my patient took long, slow sips, breathing deeply and stopping now and then to stare up at me. Presently, an innocent, beautiful smile came on the lips. I smiled back, realizing that this stranger had in all probability decided that I had taken his gem and left him there to die. But just as my hand went to his pocket to give it back to him, his head fell back again across my arm. It was so heavy that I had to lie down alongside it to support it. And the canteen was finished that way. I bathed the forehead and face with my wet bandana, too. When I produced my plastic water bag, the smile changed to pure wonder and the eyes grew wider still. Despite thirst, that transparent plastic had to be felt and poked at before my patient would drink. I can remember how oval and shiny the nails were. Not polished, you know, but buffed in some way, and very clean. I could even see their white half-moons. The real moon was going down fast behind us. In the last light on the shore, I noticed that the longboat had washed close in. She was riding heeled over, dousing that broken mast in and out with every quiet swell. It would have been a torturing end for someone tied there. I guess I shuddered. The person in my arms raised up enough to follow my gaze, and for a second, I saw again the furious aristocrat. Saw and felt it was like a jolt of voltage through my arms and chest. I didn't like the idea of what so much rage could do in a person so weak. By luck, I had just located an old piece of health bar in my shirt. It was sodden, but okay. So I broke it and touched it to the stranger's lips. Es bueno, come. A tongue tip came out to explore the lips, dainty as a cat. Chocolate. My patient stared at me open-mouthed, the boat forgotten. See, it's good. Eat some. Chocolate. And the next thing I knew, the stranger had stuffed the whole thing in his or her mouth like a kid, with me trying to say, take it easy, and both of us grinning like mad. I recall thinking that chocolate couldn't be all that rare in Peru or wherever. Was it possible the person I was holding in my arms was simply a refugee from some expensive nut house? But there was only one thing I was determined to find out if I could just hold out until my companion went to sleep. It wouldn't be long now. Another sip of water, and the furry lashes were sweeping low with fatigue. The only trouble was I was almost asleep myself, and the darkness coming over us didn't help. Even the occasional muffled clanking from the boat was starting to sound like music. I wedged a sharp rock under my shoulder, and that helped a bit. The person in my arms was drifting off. I could feel the body softening and fitting against mine in a way that made me absolutely convinced it had to be a woman or the damnedest gay the earth ever created. But that rock was getting to feel soft. I was desperate enough to actually try pinching myself as hard as I could with fingers that felt like jello. The second time I did that, I hit the lump in my back pocket and remembered the ruby. That woke me a little. It seemed unbearable that this aristocrat might think the stone had bought that water. So I wriggled enough to unbutton and carefully pull it out, or rather, tried to. My fingers had never felt so clumsy. It was almost like the stone was hiding it didn't want to come. But I finally managed to get hold of it and ease it across my body toward where one of her hands was lying on the sand beside the head. A star shone right through as I raised it. I guess a poet could find the right words, but the truth is that the only red flash I've ever seen like that was on a police squad car. The hand was lying palm up with the fingers slightly curled, and I went to put the ruby in it. Again, I had trouble. The hand moved, but without if I can describe it, maybe I was just too dead to focus right, and that she body was half under mine now, and it moved in a way that, well, you wouldn't have thought mine could respond in the state I was in, but I did. That made me more than ever eager to get rid of that damn stone. I made 3 grabs at that little hand and caught the wrist and forced the thing into her palm and curled her fingers over it so I could get my own hand back where it wanted to be. But her body had slackened and fallen away from me, and before I could stop myself, my nose went down in her cool dark hair, and I was dead to the world. I didn't remember until the next day that just at the very end, as I was folding her warm fingers, they seemed to change too and turn kind of cold and stiff. And there was a strange faint sound away from the sea. I guess it might have been a kind of wail from the boat scraping, or like a bird's voice. His own voice had grown cool and quiet. That's it, really. He showed his teeth in a comfortless grin. I woke up in a blazing sunrise, all alone. There wasn't one mark on the beach. Not even my own footprints. But lots of plastic trash now. There was a Clorox bottle by my head. It hadn't been there before. Maybe the tide sent up a little wavelet, enough to smooth everything out without waking me. It was far out again by then, farther than I'd ever seen it. No sign of a boat, of course. I guess if this was a good ghost story, there'd have been something. He gave that joyless grin. But there wasn't a single trace. Not even one long black hair. I looked, you see. I looked. The only thing was, my hip pocket was unbuttoned. How I searched, and all the while hearing Lirios' damn radio yattering from over on the bluff. He made a sound somewhere between a cough and a sigh. After a while I climbed up. The path was right behind me. When I looked out back, I noticed 3 or 4 dark knobs of wood sticking out of the water, way far out, like in a line. I bought some tacos off Pedro and filled up the canteen on his skunk water with the radio banging out mariachis and tire ads. The thing is, Pedro's pozo, his well, was right where the old cenote, the water hole, had been. I checked. It was the same view, but the water was low, like everywhere else that year. So I went back on the beach and walked on north. It was like a dream. I mean, not the other. The dream was Lirios and Pedro's chistes. Joking. No, it was more like 2 dreams at once. Ever since. He was eyeing me intently, Maya style, out of the corners of his clear gringo eyes. I got very busy discouraging some sugar ants that were after his pack roll. When I came by next year, you weren't around. No. I was late. Yeah. And I was earlier. Nobody was around but some kids in that lab with the machete. He nodded his bearded egg, who had resumed surveillance at extreme range. When I got by Lirios, there were 5 borrachos from the Guardia Nacional roaring up and down the beach on their new Hondas and firing guns at the moon, so I went on by. About sunrise, I met an old ranchero walking down from Tulum. We talked a while. A fine old guy gave me my plastic water bag. Turned out he knew all about me. You know how it goes around here. De veras. I've never gone anywhere yet I wasn't expected. Yeah. He wasn't listening. Anyway, he wanted to make sure I passed by Lirios at full moon the year before. When I told him yes, he said, "Good. In la noche negra, the moon dark, the very bad ones come. Not often, you understand. But they can." Then he asked me if anybody had given me anything there. I told him, no, at least I didn't keep it. He looked at me real hard and serious. "Bueno," he said, "if you had kept it, you would be perdido. Lost. So long as you touch or hold anything. And are you free now? It is much the best that you go by day." Do you know the name of that place? No. El Paso Los Muertos, the pass or place of the dead. Their querencia, because all things come to the shore there, from Ascension, Morales, Jamaica even. Sometimes quite big lanchas, shrimp boats, even from the Gulf. The rocks turn the current underwater, you see. Far out. People used to make mucho dinero from what came there, but only by day, you understand. Only in the light of the sun. That's all finished now. The Guardia Aéreo finds them first from their planes, he pointed out east, where the sea turns by the Rife de Cozumel. Only wood and basura, worthless things, come now. I think I saw the ribs of one old wreck. The tide was very far out. Ah? He gave me that penetrating stare again. It must have indeed been very low water, he said. Only once in my youth have I seen such a thing. I waded out to see it. In the day, it had been a sailing boat. You know the metal grimpas used to hold the mast ropes? He did a little sketch in the sand, showing the stays. These were not fitted in, my friend, the way they do today. They were made of hot metal, poured into the side of the ship, which had not been done for 300 years. My visitor gave a deep sigh or shudder and tried the grin again. Anyway, we said goodbye and went our ways, and when I got to Tulum, I heard that something had happened to one of the drunk Soldadero kids the night before. I found out later that Pedro's brother dragged the Honda out of the drink and filed off all the numbers. He's trying to fix it up. Abruptly, the light eyes locked on mine. I couldn't dodge. Look. Is it possible? He nodded at the shelves behind the glass. You're supposed to know things, aren't you? Could I, dreamed all that? I mean, it went on so long, it started right over there, you know. I must have walked after that thing for 10 miles. His voice got low and slow, the words almost forced out. Could I have made it up? Believe me, I'm not a daydreamer. I don't even dream much at night. And I don't drink. Only a few beers. No grass for years now. The other shit they have down here, I learned not to mess with that the first week I was here. And fiction, movies, mystic stuff, forget it. Here, look. He bent and fished a thick pamphlet out of his pack. It was titled Hydraulic Properties of Natural Stone Aggregates. He pulled it back and looked straight at me. Am I crazy? How could I have made all that up? Was I in a different time? Am I crazy? What do you think? He was really asking. I was thinking that I knew many people who would be delighted to take charge to enlighten him on the ultimate nature and limits of reality, or the effects of dehydration and solitude on cerebral function. But some minutes earlier I had discovered I wasn't one of them. What in hell did I think? What had I been doing all during that long account, except believing him? I knew what I should think, of course. All too well I knew. But, well, maybe one can dwell too long on the sands of the Quintana Roo. I started a tentative mumble when he interrupted me, almost whispering. How could I have made up that song? Song? I guess I didn't tell you about that. His face had turned back toward the sea, so that all I could catch from the fading gusts of the stuffer was something about at the end, and even this year. He coughed again and began to hum tunelessly and finally sang a phrase or two, still watching the far reefs. His voice was clear and pleasing, but totally off any conceivable key. You see? He glanced at me, briefly. I can't sing at all. So how could I? I can hear it, though. The tune he had produced could have been any of 100 Spanish whales. Amorado, Corazón de Oro, Amor dorado lejos, lejos por la mar, Quisiera viajar, that sort of thing. Love, golden love, far over the sea. Who would not journey into the golden heart of the sea? If there was anything extraordinary there, my Spanish could not detect it. Yet it seemed to have significance for him, as sometimes the most ordinary phrases do. In our dreams. Could I salvage my own sanity by hinting at this? But whatever I might have said, I had delayed too long. His gaze was on the sea again, and he spoke in a whisper. Not to me. No. I didn't make up that song. Our moment had passed. Abruptly, he was on his feet, picking up his pack and canteen. The sea was almost calm now, a burnished splendor of green, gold, and salmon, flushed with unearthly lavender and rose, reflections of the tropic sunset behind us, my dismayed protests blended with his farewell. Please wait, I assumed you'd spend the night here. I have a good spare hamaca. He shook his flaming head, smiling politely. No, but thanks for the stuff and everything. I mean, really. Can't you wait a moment? I meant to give you some... But he was already moving away, turning to stride down the beach. My last view of his expression was a mingled eagerness and sadness, a young face shadowed by a resolution I couldn't hope to break. The sunset behind us was now filling the air with a golden haze. The palms were still. After a moment, I followed him down to the beach, irresolute. His easy stride was deceptive. By the time I reached the tide line, his thin figure was already filmed by the soft twilight air between us. Even to catch him now, I would have to run. The mad notion of accompanying him on his walk through the night died before the reality of the old heart, jittering in my ribs. I could only stand and watch him dwindle, fade into the stick figure I had seen at first. Tropic dusts come fast. By the time he was rounding the point, I could barely make him out, had it not been for the occasional glint of his red hair. Just as he turned the corner of the mangroves, a new light came from seaward and lit up his head with rosy fire. Then he was gone. I turned and saw that the full moon was rising through the cloud castles on the sea, a great misshapen ball of cold, gaseous light. For a moment, it shone clear at the apex of its luminous sea path, and the beach became a snowscape in silver and black. Then the high clouds took it again, in racing patterns of lemon and smoky bronze. And I turned to make my way up the dark casa. Automatically, I registered the high Sirius from the east. Tomorrow would be fine. As I neared the patio, X-Hat scuttled behind a dune on the road. He too had been watching the stranger go, and that's it, really, as the strange boy said. The night turned greasy hot, so that about midnight I went down to cool myself in the placid sea. Mayas do not do this. They say that the brown sharks come close in on calm nights to bear their young in the shallows. I waded out hip-deep to my sandbar, wondering where my visitor was now. Great Canopus had risen, and in the far south I could just see Alpha Centauri, magnificent. Even in the horizon veils, the sheer beauty of the scene was calming. No wonder my young friend wanted to make his way by night. Doubtless he was already near Tulum, perhaps curled up in one of his wayside nests, savoring a grapefruit, fighting off the chiquitistas. The thought of the grapefruits had reassured me some time back. Surely, a man does not seek out to meet God knows what, to follow delusions, or invoke spirits, or yield to succubi, armed with 2 mediocre grapefruits and a baggie of maple syrup. But as I stood there in the Quicksilver Caribbean, a triangular shadow with something large and dark below it caught my attention. Only a sea fan, no doubt. But I decided it would be prudent to return to land before it came into the channel I had to cross, and as I splashed ashore, another memory came back. My young friend claimed to have fed chocolate to his particular apparition. Was my maple syrup possibly destined for the same? This troubling notion, combined with the extraordinary heat and heavy calm effects not often met on this shore, and with an overactive conscience to give me a very bad hour on the patio that night. What had I done? Letting him go on. Hallucinated, or sane, it was equally bad. Several times I came within a gull feather of rousting out Don Pao's son to ride with me to Lirios on his bike. But what then? Either we would find nothing or ignominiously come upon my young man eating Pedro's tacos. And either way, my hard-won reputation of being a fairly sensible gringo would be gone for good. I fear that selfishness rather than good sense drove me finally to my hammock and uneasy sleep, and in the fresh morning breeze, what passes for sanity prevailed. The tale has no real ending, but only one more detail which may have no bearing at all. The next week of fine weather saw me plunged back into some long overdue paperwork, during which no gossip came by, and then the advent of the rancho's first real live school teacher threw everyone into a great bustle. She was a resolute and long-suffering Maya maiden, sent by the gobernero to see that the rancho's grandchildren did not grow up as wild as their parents had. I found myself involved in making peace between her and the owner, who paid one of his rare visits expressly to get her out. My task was almost hopeless until the generator conveniently and expensively broke down, and I was able to convince him that it might be useful if someone could read the manual. Thus, with one thing and another, I found no occasion to query Don Pao about the gringo caminante before it was time for me to go. The next year, I came early, and I found myself keeping one eye on the beach. Nothing came by until there was a little excitement at Lirios. A small body did wash ashore, but I quickly discovered that it was the corpse of a small, dark man with the name Olga tattooed on his arm. That evening was another windless one, and I strolled over to where Don Pao and his lady were dining alone in their outdoor kitchen. The last of their resident sons was staying in Cozumel that year, learning to lay bricks. After the ritual greetings, I remarked that one was reminded of the red-haired gringo walker who did not seem to have come by this year. As I spoke, the old man's mouth drew down until he looked exactly like the petty Maya chieftain his grandfather had been. Do you think he will come this year? Don Pao shrugged, and the globular brown matron who had borne his 10 children gave the all-purpose Maya matron's cackle, intended to convey nothing except possibly a low opinion of her conversant. Perhaps he has gone back to Norte Americana, I persisted. Don Pao squinted at me hard for an instant, and then his slant eyes drooped and his chin swung slowly from his shoulder to shoulder. No, he said with finality. At the same moment, his wife made an extraordinary, complex crisscross of one hand across her abdomen. It puzzled me until I recalled that some of the high-status older ladies here profess a brand of Catholicism whose rites and dogmas would doubtless astonish the Roman Church. Then she got up to take the plates. I did not need to look another look at the old man's archaic face to know that the subject was closed, and to sense, too, I would not be seeing the strange red-haired boy again. But why? I thought as I made my farewells. What do they? What can they know? I have enough casual informants along this coast to ensure that nothing really disastrous or sensational could have occurred without my catching at least an echo of it after this long. Mayas love morbidity. The actual fact was probably that my young friend was minting money in the swimming pool business or had decided to explore someplace else. Yet, as I sat, On my moonlit patio, listening to the quiet splash of the wavelets on the beach below, they seemed to be sighing out the odd little tuneless tune my visitor had tried to sing. Amor dorado, lejos, lejos por la mar. I realized I'd been half hearing it now and again, particularly when I swam on quiet days, but I had put it down to the murmur in my bad ear. Now it was plainer, and the stranger's whole tale came back to me as I had not let it do before. A year had passed and cooled. I could reflect. I found I did not believe it, or rather I did not believe in its outward detail and aspect. It could, I suppose, be some unquiet spirit who came to my young friend, some long-dead Spaniard, or revenant conquistador, some androgynous adventurer proffering ghostly gold, a life-hungry succubus from the shadows between the living and the dead. Or he could have been very simply out of his head. Yet I didn't believe that either. What haunts me, yet, is the idea that something did come to him there. Something deeper than all of these, which took on those manifestations to lure and seek him out. Something to which he was peculiarly vulnerable, and which, I fear, took him to itself on the night he left me. For it has been 5 years now that he has not been here, and there is word that his partner in Des Moines has never seen him back. What could it be? I gazed out, long, at the impersonal beauty before me, scarcely daring to name it. The last great wonder of the world. Anything you need, the boy had said. Whimsical as a tea tray. Seductive as a ruby. More terrible than all the petty armies of man. Who could say what was not in it, despite all our tiny encroachments and sorties? Perhaps we will kill it. And with it, ourselves. But it is far from dead yet, and its life is ours. As the boy had said, too, our blood is its very substance, moving in our veins. As I prepared to cease gazing and go to my human sleep, I recalled a trivial detail, which carried an odd conviction. The Spanish word mar has one extraordinary aspect. El mar, la mar, sea, is the only word in Spanish or in any other tongue known to me which is both male and female indifferently and alike. If it was indeed the sea which came from my friend, is it any wonder that it came in a double guise?